Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Andrew Sullivan had always believed he knew his wife better than anyone else in the world. 25 years of marriage wasn't nothing. It was Sunday mornings making breakfast together, winter nights sharing blankets on the couch, arguments over bills and plans for the future. It was wrinkles appearing at the same pace, hair graying side by side, laughter shared and tears wiped away by each other. Or at least that's what Andrew thought, until that Friday in April, when everything collapsed before his eyes during a dinner that was supposed to be a celebration. The table was set with care. Andrew had prepared Diane's favorite dish, a mushroom risotto he'd perfected over the years, and bought a special bottle of red wine for the occasion. 25 years. Silver anniversary. A milestone worth celebrating, even if just in a simple way, just the two of them, as they always did. Diane came home from work around 7 that evening, a bit later than planned, but Andrew was used to it. Over the past few months, her overtime at the law firm where she worked as a paralegal had become increasingly frequent. She always explained that the attorneys were overwhelmed with complex cases and needed extra support. Andrew, a literature professor at the local university, understood well the pressure of deadlines and professional demands, so he never questioned it much. But that night, as Diane walked through the door with a tired smile and apologized for being late, Andrew noticed something different, something that made his stomach twist in a way he couldn't immediately explain. She was wearing a bracelet he'd never seen before. It was white gold or silver, delicate but clearly expensive, with small charms that softly jingled with every movement. Diane had never been one for much jewelry, maybe a simple necklace now and then, discreet earrings, and of course, her wedding ring. The ring Andrew had placed on her finger on a sunny spring morning 25 years ago, promising eternal love. The ring that wasn't there now. Andrew's heart raced as he watched Diane take off her coat and hang it on the hook by the door. She walked over to the table, admired the setup he'd prepared, and kissed him quickly on the cheek. "Sorry I'm late, honey. It was crazy at the office today." Her voice sounded normal, but Andrew could barely process the words. His eyes were fixed on her left hand, on the bare fingers where the most important symbol of their life together should have been. "Diane," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "where's your wedding ring?" She looked down at her own hand as if noticing its absence for the first time, though Andrew knew that was impossible. No one loses a wedding ring without noticing. "Oh, that," she replied with a calmness that felt too practiced. "It was getting too tight, you know. I think my fingers swelled a bit from the heat. I took it in to get resized a few days ago. Should be ready next week." The explanation would have been perfectly reasonable, if Andrew hadn't seen that same ring comfortably on Diane's finger just 4 days earlier, when they'd had coffee together before heading off to work. He remembered clearly because he'd held her hand across the table while they talked about their upcoming anniversary. The ring had been there, normal, showing no sign of discomfort. "And the bracelet?" Andrew asked, pointing to her wrist. "Is it new?" Diane gave a quick smile and adjusted the bracelet on her arm. "Yeah. I got it for myself. You know how it is, 25 years of marriage. I figured I deserved something special to celebrate." She turned toward the table. "Dinner looks beautiful, Andrew. You outdid yourself." They sat down and started eating, but Andrew could barely taste the food. His mind was racing, connecting dots he'd either ignored or simply hadn't seen before. The frequent overtime. The phone calls Diane took in another room. Her new habit of always keeping her phone face down. The longer showers when she got home. The different perfume she'd started wearing. How could he have been so blind? Dinner passed in a haze of forced conversation and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Diane talked about cases at the office, Andrew mentioned his students, but neither was truly present. When they finished, Diane said she was exhausted and went to shower before bed. Andrew stayed alone in the kitchen, mechanically washing the dishes, as the world he knew began to crack at the edges. He couldn't sleep that night. He lay next to Diane, listening to her steady breathing, wondering how she could sleep so easily. Around 3 in the morning, Andrew quietly got up and went to the living room. Diane's purse was on the armchair, where she always left it when she came home. He hesitated for only a second before opening it. It wasn't something he'd ever have done under normal circumstances. Andrew believed in privacy, trust, respect. But that bracelet on Diane's wrist and the missing ring had planted a seed of suspicion that now bloomed in his chest like a poisonous vine. Inside the purse, among her wallet, keys, and makeup, he found the bracelet carefully stored in a velvet case. Diane had taken it off before bed, probably to avoid raising more suspicion. Andrew opened the case and examined the bracelet under the dim light of the lamp. It was beautiful, he had to admit that. Delicate and feminine. He flipped one of the charms over, and then he saw it. Engraved on the inside, in tiny but perfectly legible letters, "Forever, J." J, who was J? Andrew mentally ran through all their friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. There was no significant J in their lives. None who would justify such an intimate gift, so full of promise. Forever. The 2 words he and Diane had spoken to each other at the altar, now engraved on a piece of jewelry given by someone else. Andrew sat on the couch, holding the bracelet, feeling its weight in his hand. Too light to carry so much meaning, too heavy to ignore. He put the bracelet back in its case and returned it exactly where it had been in her purse. The sun began to rise, and he remained there, motionless, as the pieces fell into place in his mind. Diane wasn't working overtime. Diane was with someone else. Someone who gave her expensive gifts. Someone for whom she was willing to take off her wedding ring. When Diane woke up at 8 on Saturday morning, Andrew had already been up for hours. He'd made a decision. He wouldn't pretend he didn't know. He wouldn't let it slide. He wouldn't wait to gather more evidence or confront her at the right time. The right time was now. But first, he needed absolute certainty. While Diane showered, Andrew went to the home office. Her laptop sat on the desk, where she always left it after working at night. She always used the same password for everything, a combination of the month and year they'd gotten married. Andrew had never violated her privacy before, but now that seemed irrelevant in the face of possibly having been betrayed. The computer opened easily. Andrew searched through folders, browser history, recent files. At first, he found nothing. Diane was careful. But then he remembered a trick a colleague from the IT department had once mentioned: hidden files. He changed the settings to show hidden folders and files, and there it was. A folder buried inside several others, simply named Backup 2024. Andrew opened it. What he saw in the hours that followed would change his life forever. Photos. Dozens of them. Diane smiling at the camera next to a man Andrew recognized immediately, Jason Crowley, the senior attorney at the firm where Diane worked. Married. Father of 3 children. Andrew had met him a few times at company events, a man in his mid-40s, charming, successful, with the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what you want in life. In the photos, Diane and Jason were at restaurants, hotels, parks. In some, she wore the bracelet. In none did she wear her wedding ring. There were also screenshots of their conversations, messages that made Andrew's stomach churn. Declarations of love. Plans for the future. Complaints about their respective spouses. And then, the message that confirmed everything: I love that you swapped that symbol of the past for our future. The bracelet looks perfect on you, my love. I can't wait for the day we don't have to hide anymore. Andrew read and reread that message. That symbol of the past. His ring. Their 25 years of marriage reduced to a symbol of the past that Diane had cheerfully discarded for a bracelet and empty promises from a married man. He felt a cold, sharp anger settle in his chest. It wasn't the explosive, uncontrolled kind of rage. It was something worse, the calculated anger of someone who realizes they've been made a fool of and is determined to set things right. Andrew plugged in a flash drive and copied everything, all the photos, all the messages, every piece of evidence of Diane's betrayal. Then he printed the most damning messages. When he finished, it was almost noon. He texted Diane saying he was going to pick up some books at the university and would grab lunch there, coming back in the afternoon. She replied with a heart emoji. Andrew felt sick. He walked into the living room where Diane was watching TV, carefree. "Diane," he said, his voice so cold that she looked up in surprise. "I need to talk to you. Now." "In the dining room." She turned off the TV and followed him to the dining room. Andrew had already laid out all the printed papers on the table, placed the flash drive beside them. When Diane saw the evidence spread out, the color drained from her face. She went pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open in shock. "Andrew, I can explain." "Explain?" Andrew cut in, his voice gaining a harshness he didn't know he had. "Explain how you traded 25 years of marriage for a cheap bracelet? Explain how you took off your ring to sleep with my replacement? Or maybe you'd like to explain who Jay is?" "Jason, I assume?" Diane started trembling. She tried to move closer, but Andrew stepped back. "No," he said firmly. "Don't touch me. Not now. Maybe never again." "It was a mistake," Diane whispered, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. "Andrew, please, it was just a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I still love you." "You love me?" Andrew laughed, but it was a bitter sound, devoid of humor. "Funny way to show love. 6 months, Diane. For 6 months you lied to me. 6 months you left here after breakfast and went straight into his arms. How many times did you come home, kiss me, and pretend everything was fine? How many nights did you sleep next to me after being with him?" "Andrew, please," Diane was sobbing now, but Andrew felt no compassion. All he felt was deep pain and ironclad resolve. "Did he promise to leave his wife for you?" Andrew asked, picking up one of the printed messages. "Here it is, I just need the right moment to tell Amanda. I don't want to hurt the kids." Pathetic. "And you believe that? Did you really think a man who cheats on his wife and lies to her would be honest with you?" He said their marriage had been over for years. Diane tried to defend herself, though her voice was weak. "He said I was different, that with me, he'd found what was missing." "And you?" Andrew interrupted. "What was missing in our marriage? What didn't I give you? Respect? Love? Loyalty? Because I gave you all of that, Diane. Everything. And you threw it away for what? A few fancy dinners and a bracelet with a sugary engraving?" Diane had no answer. She just cried, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Andrew watched the woman he'd loved for a quarter of a century fall apart before him and felt nothing but emptiness. "I want you to leave," he finally said. "Today. Now. Pack your things and go wherever you want, to his place, maybe? Let's see if Jason's willing to take you in when reality comes knocking." "Andrew, don't do this," Diane pleaded. "We can talk, we can try to fix this. It was just a mistake, a moment of weakness. I choose you. I'll always choose you." "You chose him when you took off your ring," Andrew replied, each word deliberate and cutting. "You chose him every time you lied to me. You chose him when you let him buy you a bracelet symbolizing your future together. Don't come here now saying you choose me just because your house of lies has collapsed. You traded 25 years for a cheap bracelet and empty promises. Now you'll find out the real cost of that trade." Diane tried to argue, but Andrew was unmoved. He went upstairs and started pulling her clothes from the closet, tossing them into suitcases. She followed him, begging, but he didn't give in. Within 2 hours, the suitcases were packed and by the door. Diane, eyes red and swollen, gathered her things. She also took the bracelet from her purse and tucked it among her clothes. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to abandon that symbol of her fantasy. Before closing the door, she turned one last time. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I really am." Andrew closed the door without answering. Then, for the first time since discovering everything, he broke down. He sat on the hallway floor and cried, for the lost years, the broken trust, the future he'd imagined that would now never exist. He cried for the version of himself who believed in happy endings and eternal love. But Andrew wasn't the kind of man to stay stuck in pain. In the days that followed, he acted with surgical precision. First, he consulted a divorce attorney. He presented all the evidence of Diane's infidelity. The lawyer was impressed by the volume of documented proof and said the case would favor Andrew. Then, Andrew did something he knew would change more lives than just his own. He printed an envelope containing the most incriminating messages and photos between Diane and Jason. No personal identification, just the evidence. He sent one copy to Amanda Crowley, Jason's wife, at their home address. He sent another copy, anonymously, to the law firm where they both worked, addressed to the senior partners. The firm had a clear and strict policy about relationships between employees, especially when they involved subordinates and supervisors. Jason was a senior attorney. Diane was a paralegal under his supervision. Their relationship wasn't just an ethical violation, it was also a legal one, given the power dynamic involved. The consequences were swift and devastating. Amanda Crowley, upon receiving the envelope, confronted Jason immediately. He tried to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. She kicked him out of the house that same night. At the office, an internal investigation began as soon as the partners received the anonymous envelope. Jason was called into an emergency meeting. He tried to downplay the relationship, claiming it was consensual and happened outside work hours, but the firm didn't want the risk of exposure or lawsuits. Jason Crowley was fired within 48 hours, his reputation permanently tarnished in the legal community. Diane was summoned as well. She tried to explain herself, but the truth was undeniable. She'd violated the company's code of ethics and compromised professional integrity. She was fired alongside Jason, effective immediately. Within a week, Diane had lost her marriage, her job, and any chance of a future with Jason. Because Jason, facing a contentious divorce from Amanda and the loss of his career, wanted nothing to do with whatever had brought him to this point. When Diane tried to contact him, desperate for some support or confirmation that what they'd had was real, Jason was brutally honest. In a short, cold text message, he said it had been a mistake from the start, that he'd never truly intended to leave Amanda, and that Diane should move on. He blocked her immediately after. Diane tried one last time to return to Andrew. She showed up at the door of the house that had once been theirs, begging for a second chance. She said she'd lost everything, that she was sorry, that Jason had abandoned her, and she now realized Andrew was the only man who'd ever truly loved her. Andrew listened to her speak for a full 5 minutes without interrupting. When she finished, he said only one thing: "Funny how cheap symbols don't hold relationships together, huh?" And he closed the door. The divorce process was surprisingly quick. Diane had no resources to fight for the house or marital assets. The house had been inherited from Andrew's family, so it was legally his already. Their savings were divided, but Andrew kept the larger share due to the circumstances of the separation. Diane walked away from the marriage with only a fraction of what they'd built over 25 years. A year later, on a sunny spring morning, Andrew was in the living room of his now remodeled home, free of any trace of Diane, packing a donation box. He'd decided to do a complete clean-out, getting rid of everything that tied him to the past. Among the items was a small jewelry box, all the pieces he'd given Diane over the years that she'd left behind when she left. Birthday earrings, Christmas necklaces, Mother's Day bracelets from when she still dreamed of becoming a mother, before they decided her career came first. He put everything in a box and drove to Hope House, a local shelter for women escaping domestic violence. Andrew had become a volunteer there over the past few months, teaching literature and creative writing classes to the residents. It was his way of turning his pain into something useful, helping people who, unlike him, lacked the resources or support to rebuild their lives. The shelter's coordinator, a woman named Margaret, gratefully accepted the donation. "This will help so many women," she said, examining the jewelry. "We can sell it and use the money to fund our programs." "I hope so," Andrew replied. "These pieces mean a lot to me, but maybe they can start meaning hope for someone else." Margaret smiled and called over some of the residents to see the donation. Among them was a woman in her 40s, dark hair streaked with gray, tired but kind eyes. She introduced herself as Patricia. While the other women examined the jewelry, Patricia stayed quiet, just watching. Andrew noticed she wore her wedding ring on a chain around her neck. "My husband passed away 3 years ago," Patricia explained when she saw Andrew looking. "Cancer. I wear the ring like this to keep him close to my heart." She paused. "I know it sounds silly." "It's not silly," Andrew said gently. "It's a beautiful way to honor what you had." "Symbols matter," Patricia said, touching the ring. "Not for their material value, but for what they represent: commitment, true love, memories no one can take from us." Andrew felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a year, it wasn't pain or anger. It was something close to peace. "Yes," he agreed. "Symbols really do matter." In the months that followed, Andrew and Patricia began talking more during his visits to the shelter. She'd left an abusive relationship that started after her husband's death, a man who'd promised to care for her but ended up hurting her deeply. She was rebuilding her life, working as a nurse and living in a small apartment she'd secured with the shelter's help. She was a survivor, strong, determined, wise from having walked through hell and come out the other side. They didn't start a romantic relationship right away. Neither was ready. But they formed a genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of pain and new beginnings. They talked about books, resilience, and how sometimes you have to lose everything to discover who you really are. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Diane lived in a small, dimly lit apartment, working a minimum-wage job at a department store. She'd tried to start over, find another paralegal position, but her termination for ethical violations followed her like a shadow. No law firm wanted to hire her. Jason Crowley had also lost everything: his marriage, his career, his social standing. He now worked as a freelance legal consultant, earning a fraction of what he used to. Diane still had the bracelet. She kept it tucked away in a drawer, unable to wear it, yet unable to throw it away. It was all that remained of a fantasy she'd chased and that had destroyed her life. Sometimes, on lonely nights, she'd take out the bracelet and read the engraving. "Forever, J." Empty words from a man who never truly wanted her. She'd think of Andrew, how he'd been faithful and present for 25 years, and how she'd thrown it all away. One day, Diane saw a photo of Andrew on social media. He was at a charity event hosted by Hope House, genuinely smiling next to a dark-haired woman who gently held his hand. The caption mentioned donations that had allowed the shelter to expand its programs. In the comments, people praised Andrew's volunteer work, calling him a man of character and an example of kindness. Diane stared at the photo for a long time. Andrew looked happy, truly happy. Not the forced happiness they'd faked in the last years of their marriage, but something genuine and calm. She realized then, with painful clarity, what she'd lost. Not just a husband, a home, or a comfortable life, but a good man, a true partner, someone who'd loved her unconditionally and whom she'd discarded as if he meant nothing. Diane took the bracelet from the drawer and held it in her hand. The metal felt cold against her skin. She thought of all the times she'd worn it, feeling special and desired, unaware she was building her own destruction. She thought of Andrew preparing anniversary dinners while she planned secret meetings. She thought of the wedding ring she'd so easily removed, as if 25 years could be erased with a simple gesture. The cost of the trade. She finally understood. She'd exchanged an entire life, security, true love, respect, dignity, for an illusion. For empty promises and stolen moments that felt exciting but were fundamentally destructive. The bracelet she'd once treasured was worth nothing compared to what she'd lost. Diane put the bracelet back in the drawer, but this time not as a treasure. As a reminder. A symbol not of the love she thought she'd found, but of the devastating mistake she'd made. She knew she'd never wear that bracelet again. And she also knew she'd never get back what she'd thrown away. Meanwhile, across town, Andrew smiled genuinely as he talked with Patricia about plans for the future. They weren't grand or rushed plans, just the promise of building something new, something real, based on honesty and mutual respect. He still wore his wedding ring, now on a chain, not as a symbol of a lost love, but as a reminder that he'd been faithful until the end, that he'd honored his vows even when the other person hadn't. Symbols mattered. Andrew had learned that the hard way. A ring could be swapped for a bracelet, but what those objects represented had no equivalent price. Fidelity, commitment, true love, these weren't things you could buy at a jewelry store or engrave in metal. They were built day after day, choice after choice, through honesty and mutual sacrifice. And when someone chose to discard those values for a shiny illusion, the price they paid was always greater than any fleeting benefit. Diane had learned that too. But for her, the lesson came too late. She'd traded everything for nothing, and now lived with the consequences of her choice, carrying a worthless bracelet as a permanent reminder of the day she destroyed her own life for empty promises and selfish desires. Life went on. Andrew rebuilt his with dignity and wisdom born of pain. Diane dragged hers along, haunted by the ghost of what could have been if only she'd valued what she had while she still had it. And between them, separating two such different futures, lay a simple truth: some choices can't be undone, and some prices, once paid, can never be recovered. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.